Welcome to Policy on Demand. I'm Sindhu Blume.
And I'm Scott McCandless. It is the week of November 27th, and this is your Monday briefing. Congress returns from its Thanksgiving recess this week, and before they left for recess, they passed a continuing resolution to fund the government through early next year. To level set, as we return from the holiday break, the CR into January and February means there is no obvious year-end vehicle to carry the tax package to enactment. That tax package is not completed anyway, as tax leaders continue to negotiate its terms, and while Congress will be working this week and next on a targeted funding bill to address foreign aid, such as Israel and Ukraine, as well as reauthorization for the Federal Aviation Authority, it may not be able to deliver on tax in December. Companies will need to continue to pressure congressional leadership to keep the tax issues elevated for future consideration.
Another development we want to point out, the United Nations on November 22nd voted to establish an intergovernmental working group to lay the groundwork for establishing an international framework convention on international tax cooperation that would be in direct competition with OECD projects. Most OECD member countries objected to this move, including the United States and EU member countries, noting it would be duplicative and does not have consensus. And now, Craig Stronberg joins us as a follow-up to a recent meeting between President Joe Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping on November 15th at the APEC Summit in San Francisco. Craig, welcome.
Thank you. Good to see you both.
Craig, what substantive issues emerged from the talks, and to what extent are any of those issues enforceable?
So this is a key question for companies. I don't know that there was really a lot of net new stuff that was agreed to. The principal point of success was that they met, right? It happened, it worked, it was cordial. They had extended period of time alone with their teams. That was sort of the mark of success, that it actually took place. What it didn't do, because there weren't really any measurable accomplishments, is it didn't solve any of the big problems that companies face, right? So the not so good news is that nothing really changed for U.S. businesses in terms of what they are facing in China, which is heightened regulations, more inspections on the ground, a very complex data and cybersecurity regulation environment, and a huge uncertainty about whether or not they should invest or what portion of their business should even be in the market. And it didn't resolve the U.S. issues either, right? It didn't resolve clarity about how U.S. protectionist policy would go towards China from the U.S. in the future. It didn't talk about export controls or foreign investment controls from the U.S. point of view. And it really didn't get to a lot of the core issues that drive corporate concern about U.S.-China relations. So it's good that they met, but none of the big stuff got resolved. It's all still there.
But in terms of next steps for companies, so this meeting is symbolic, but what do they take away from that in terms of next steps or considerations that they might want to make?
So part of the good news for companies, and Sindhu, you and I talked about this in sort of part one of this conversation, was the fact that there has been this trans-Pacific diplomacy over the last year leading up to this, and they pledged to continue that. That is good news, right? Because if you're trying to make sure that U.S.-China relations don't get in the way of your global growth as a company, you want tensions to be as low as possible. They've laid the groundwork for that possibility to happen, right? So the fact that there will be more meetings, that they're going to continue down this path of slowly building or rebuilding trust is good. But there are not a lot of key data points here for companies to change the way they do business in China or invest in China. So if companies were looking for clear signals about what should they do in China, they didn't get that from this meeting. That's going to be resolved or not resolved later, which means companies need to continue to assess this on their own and continuously.
I want to follow up on that. One word that has not come up during this conversation is de-risking or decoupling. So was there an overarching theme of that in the talks?
So the U.S. side did emphasize that, de-risking and not decoupling, right, is the point of view, the philosophy, the driving force of their policy, which is true. But at the same time, both the Chinese and the US sides in that meeting know that there is a part of that de-risking strategy really focused on US technology for now that is actually about decoupling. It's not immediate, but it is about creating a space between certain US technologies and their export or use in China. And so overall, right, we're trying to sell de-risking, not decoupling, to China officially. And they believe that to a degree. But this technology part is getting in the way. And both sides understand that that's true.
Craig, the administration this week will be announcing a new Council on Supply Chain Resilience. Could you talk a little bit about what this might mean, especially in the post-US-China meeting context?
Look, I think it's definitely connected. So I think the short answer for companies is that this means that you're going to be hearing a lot more about supply chain in the midst of US-China relations from the government and from the next government, right? Whether that's whomever wins, because they've been looking at this for a while. And so part one of this is going to be whatever they're going to release in their reports. Then part two is going to be their recommendations. And then part three is the administration is going to be looking for new law and new regulatory creation so they can better understand what U.S. companies are selling to China down to the component level. And that's what companies need to start to get ready for.
Finally, Craig, we mentioned earlier the UN international tax cooperation efforts. What do you think that development means for global relations?
So I think what's really interesting about this from a geopolitical point of view is, I mean, look, businesses have had so much thrown at them in the last 5 or 6 years.
Yeah.
Like they're not ready for more curveballs. There's probably a big tectonic shift coming in the next 10 or 20 years. And that is something that we have been talking about for 30 years. And that is the rise of the global South. You know, the rise of, if you will, the developing nations of the world, right? In Africa, Asia, South America, Latin America, that have gained new political and economic power, are increasingly connected to one another and do not like the way the rules, including tax rules, right, were written over the last 80 years to favor, in their point of view, the US and Europe. And they are beginning to push back on those rules in forms where they can, and that includes the UN. So I think you're going to see more of this. Whether or not this succeeds or not, you're going to see more of these countries coming together to try and even the playing field from their point of view. And you're probably going to see China increasingly taking their side.
Interesting. Great. Craig, thank you so much for being with us and sharing your insights as always. Thanks.
Thank you. Good to see you.
And for our viewers, stay tuned for Week in Review coming up this Friday, and check out recent Policy on Demand episodes in the description of this episode.
And thank you, as always, for spending this time with us. And stay with Policy on Demand for the latest developments from Washington and around the world. Take care.